We're back now with former Democratic Georgia gubernatorial nominee Stacey Abrams. She's the author of the book entitled Lead from the Outside: How to Build Your Future and Make Real Change. We've got Casey Hunt and Yasmin Vousoughian standing by. Casey, you have a question for Stacey Abrams.
Yeah. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
I saw that you said recently that I believe identity politics are the politics that win. And that makes sense to me in the context of a Democratic primary. But I'm wondering how you think about that in the context of potentially trying to win a 2020 general election against Donald Trump in some of those Midwestern states that Democrats lost in 2016.
Identity matters to everyone. And in fact, part of the reason there is such a focus on the Midwest is that there's a specific identity we attribute to voters in the Midwest. And my argument is you can't exclude one group to focus on another. We have to have an inclusive politics that sees not only the values of people, but actually their votes as valuable. And that means you cannot ignore those who face barriers to their point of entry as voters. And you can't ignore the issues faced by those who have marginalized identities because you're afraid that you're going to lose the normative Midwestern voter. What we were able to prove in Georgia is that you can center communities of color, you can center disadvantaged communities, and pick up white voters, which is what I did. I increased the white vote share in Georgia for Democrats for the first time in a generation, because I not only acknowledged the needs of communities of color and marginalized communities, I also acknowledged the needs of white voters, white rural voters who needed hospitals and rural broadband. I acknowledged the fact that our water infrastructure is woefully inadequate, and we had to do something about that. We have to be able to walk and chew gum and snap our fingers at the same time, and we have to trust that voters don't care about someone else having things. They care about us knowing what they need. And identity politics simply means I see you. I see the barriers to your success. I see the needs and the opportunities that can be made available. And we have to have candidates who can speak authentically and with authenticity to all of these needs at the same time. I think voters are smart enough to trust that you can see them and not ignore everyone else.
Yasmin Vousoughian, jump in.
Hey, Stacey, good to talk to you today. I know that you met with the former Vice President, Joe Biden. Obviously, you know some of the accusations that have been coming out about his making women feel uncomfortable with his touching and the way in which he went about that. You've also seen the response that they put up on Twitter yesterday, the Vice President's response on Twitter. What do you make of it and his response?
I am friends with Lucy Flores, and I appreciate her bringing her story forward. I also have deep respect for Vice President Joe Biden. We cannot have perfection as a litmus test. The responsibility of leaders is to not be perfect, but to be accountable. To say, I've made a mistake, I understand it, and here's what I'm going to do to reform as I move forward. And I think we see Joe Biden doing that. I think the Vice President has acknowledged the discomfort that he has caused. He has created context for why that is his behavior. And he has affirmed that he will do something different going forward. And I think that's what we should be looking for, because we're going to find out things about everybody running for office, whether it's for the presidency or for school board. And we have to, as a people, be ready to forgive. But forgiveness does not mean you accept it unless what you see is accountability and an attempt at reformation so that more people can feel included and believe that their needs will be met.
Stacey, you've seen all the reports over the last several weeks that you and Vice President Biden have talked about a joint ticket and that he might roll out his campaign with you at his side. Are those reports accurate?
Not at all.
You haven't had any conversations about being on a ticket with Joe Biden?
I have had conversations with Joe Biden about him running for president, about me running for president, about me running for Senate, about me running for dog catcher. We have had broad conversations.
Not dog catcher. I say no on
Actually, there's only one elected dog catcher, I think, in America anymore. But nerd knowledge. But
so he never said to you, Stacey, I'd love to have you join me on the ticket.
He did not. So here's the. We did not talk about his primary strategy, and most of the speculation, I believe, comes about because of well-wishers who got excited about seeing us together, and I appreciate their enthusiasm. I think it is deeply problematic that they are making things up, but what I would say is this. I do not believe you run for second place, and I do not intend to enter a presidential race as a primary candidate for vice president. If I enter the race for president, I will enter the race for president. But once we have a nominee, I am open to having conversations. Should I not be someone who's running, I'm open to conversations with anyone who'd like to have a
Well, that
partner.
speculation really annoyed me, quite frankly, because you didn't see any speculation that Beto should be Biden's vice president. And it just seemed like, and not even coming from Biden's camp, whoever it was that was the unnamed sourcing. But in your book, you talk about the challenges that women specifically face in politics. And can you just kind of discuss that in the context of how you would approach a 2020 bid or a 2020 Senate run?
I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge any constraints that people see when they see us. I'm a black woman with natural hair and a sturdy build. And there are people who discount my capacity for leadership based on purely phenotypical issues. We have to acknowledge that. You can't ignore that that's how people behave. The issue is, what do you do with that information? For me, it's lean into it. I talk about it. I don't pretend you can't see me. But I also make certain that you understand that I'm incredibly smart, I'm very capable, and my responsibility is to then layer on what you see and make sure you know who I am. But the other problem, and I think to your point, the larger responsibility of every woman running for office is that we have to push back against those stereotypes that diminish who we are or that animate and amplify a lesser quality in a man. We are more than capable. I jokingly say sometimes men can look in the mirror and have a good hair day and they become president.
Right.
Women have to have a PhD in everything, and then we might get to be in the cabinet.
Unless we have a bad hair day.
That hair day and you're done.
Hate it when that happens.
But I think what I want folks to understand in the book is that it is disingenuous to tell us that change or difference is not there. There are always going to be barriers. My point is, you can either circumvent them, you can hack them, or you can destroy them. And so the book is designed to give you tips on how I've done all three.
I love it. The book is Lead from the Outside, How to Build Your Future and Make Real Change. Stacey Abrams, stay in the game, please. It's great to have you on the show. Come back.
Thanks, Stacey.
And still ahead, Democrats make moves in hopes of finally getting Donald Trump's tax returns. Plus, the big front page story in this morning's New York Times. Members of Robert Mueller's team believe the special counsel's findings were more damaging for the president than the attorney general revealed. We'll talk about it all next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.